It's 20 to 9. We're also talking about child poverty this morning because there are fears it could get a lot worse here in Kent. Figures from the End Child Poverty Coalition show that in Thanet, for example, a third of children live in a home where the income is at least 60% below the national average. Now, more new research, meanwhile, seen exclusively by us here at the BBC, shows a number of areas in Kent, including part of Swale, Maidstone, Dover, Thanet and Folkestone, feature on a list of left-behind neighbourhoods. It means they are more vulnerable to the cost of living crisis. So let's discuss. We can talk now to Karen Constantine, Labour County Councillor for Ramsgate. Karen, welcome to the show. I mean, first of all, we're worried about the future. We'll get to that. But what are you hearing at the moment in terms of how people are coping?
Well, good morning and thank you for having me on the show. Well, basically, people are living in a pressure cooker. I mean, a lot of the parents and grandparents that I'm speaking to are extremely anxious about how they're going to manage. And there's this sense now that things are already very bad, very bleak for a lot of people, but they're going to get worse. And so local food banks, for instance, are now putting out calls for people to bring in smash product because we know that people can't use stovetops, for instance, because budgets are too tight. We already know that, people are going without food, parents are going without food so that children can have a meal during the day. And we also already know that children are going hungry. We are seeing food banks, coat banks, bed banks, all sorts of ways and initiatives to support these children, but the crisis is growing.
What needs to be done? It sounds like it needs to be done, well, now, quite frankly.
Well, I mean, something urgently needs to happen. I mean, you're not going to be surprised to hear me being very critical of the government's approach to this, because particularly during COVID, it seems to me that the government had given, so they gave an uplift to universal credit. They took that back, which we warned them would create significant problems, which it has. And now they're giving back again, but in a particular way, where they offer families a food voucher. Well, that just doesn't cut it. That doesn't give the families the security and the income that they need. I mean, to put it into context, benefit levels now are at the lowest for 50 years. So ask yourself...
In real terms, because of inflation, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. They are now actually the lowest, and we know they're going to get lower. So, of course, families are absolutely struggling. And this has been going on here for some while. I mean, I'm absolutely passionate about child poverty. I mean, partly because I know that it can be ended, partly because I know it can be completely stopped and reversed. It's completely a pointless exercise to have so many poor children. And we've seen it growing from 2014 here in South Thanet. The child poverty rate has risen from 28% to 34%. Now, what that means on the ground is 10 children in every single classroom are below the child poverty line. I mean, think about what that experience for those kids must be like.
But I suppose if the government were here, they'd say, well, we spent a lot of money propping a lot of businesses and people up during the pandemic. It can't go on. The coffers will run dry, will bankrupt the country.
Well, the difference is you're talking about people and not businesses, and you're talking about the most vulnerable group in society that effectively don't have a voice. And one of the things that I think people don't understand about child poverty is it has a very long-term impact. So if you're brought up in poverty and you don't eat properly, then you're much more likely to suffer from forms of malnutrition. You're also more likely to become obese, to contract diabetes. Your concentration at school is impacted, so you don't get the qualifications that you might need. That then leads into long-term disadvantage in the labour market. I mean, it might sound quite callous, but these are the future workers as well. These are the people on whom the future economy and prosperity will depend on. So any sensible government would invest in young people, not subject them to this disadvantage.
Presumably you would be hoping to hear from whoever is selected for the next round of, Tory party leadership hopefuls, that they would start talking in terms of what their plans are to tackle the economics of the day and, yes, poverty.
And you won't have heard a single squeak out of any of them on this particular issue. I've been listening quite closely. It's almost as if every single Tory candidate is completely deaf to this issue. And also, I have to say, I haven't heard anything at all from our local politicians, Roger Gale or Craig McKinley. They are completely silent on this issue. And yet it is a crisis that is engulfing Thanet, and South Thanet in particular. And they are nowhere to be seen. And it's all very well and good, 100,000 people selecting the next Prime Minister. But actually what I want at the moment, and you won't be surprised to hear me say this, is a general election, because I think people genuinely need to be given a proper choice. Do we want this kind of society where kids are struggling and suffering, or actually do we want to go back to where we were with Gordon Brown, where we had a proper plan that worked to tackle child poverty?
What are Labour's policies then? Are they set in stone for how Labour would deal with child poverty?
Well, you'll know we don't release a manifesto until there's a general election period, but I can tell you we will be using the tax and the benefit system to dampen down and we will the effects of poverty, and we will be setting targets, and we did that very successfully. I mean, for instance, the Sure Start centres, which we set up, provided hugely successful in supporting families and helping to ensure that the effects of poverty were countered. And we will be doing that again. And we will be doing whatever we need to do to take this forward, because it is the next generation of people. I mean, they are important. We don't want to disenfranchise a group of people that are important in the country.
What would you do with benefits then, for example? I mean, a lot of people are saying they need to go up by inflation. Well, we know inflation's 9%, getting more than that. Would you increase them that much?
Well, it's a very complicated situation when you start to talk about how you manage the economy. What I would like to see in Thanet is actually a proper economic plan. So the means by which we would start to grow the economy here. Obviously, tourism is a huge part for us, as are things like our language schools. But I think we need to go much further than that. Maybe we could be a site for one of these gigafactories. Maybe we could max out on wave energy and wind energy offshore, etc. These are the sort of green, sort of future-focused ideas that we need to bring in. And then when we start to grow our labour market, when we start to have some genuine economic prosperity, then we'll be able to tackle once and for all child poverty.
Interesting stuff. Listen, Karen, I'm going to leave it there for time reasons only. Thank you so much for your time this morning. That's Karen Constantine, Labour County Councillor for Ramsgate. Interesting, she was talking a bit about, what some of our other guests have said this morning, which is that we need to look at this in the round. We look at the whole economy, to look at education, social care, libraries, parks, recreation areas, the full gamut, as it were. Of course, we got in touch with the government about this. A spokesperson for the Department of Work and Pensions said, look, figures show there were 500,000 fewer children in absolute poverty after housing costs than in 2009 to 10. But we recognise people are struggling with rising prices, which is why we're protecting the 8 million most vulnerable families with at least £1,200 of direct payments starting this week. And we know that that's what's happening. But is it enough in your estimation? And of course, where are we going from here? Keep your thoughts coming in on that one. We did put a call actually into Craig McKinley to see if he would come on the show today. He wasn't available to do it. I'm sure if he was here, he would say, actually, I've got lots of ideas on how I would tackle child poverty. Same goes for, of course, the MP Sir Roger Gale.